I am really blessed to be here today because whenever I attend ceremonies or conferences, usually such events take place in the Saturday. But today I am in Sri Aurobindo, which is absolutely a different place with a different ideas. And I am amidst listeners today, I think who are really more knowledgeable about Sri Aurobindo. Today's topic, I think the two areas on Sri Aurobindo and the other is Shakespeare. Two vast oceans where actually angels go to face, and unfortunately to swim through such vast ocean. Before I begin, I must thank Professor Rosman Bhuchar, who has always been a guide for teachers like us. I thank the Sri Aurobindo Society, who is actually, which is responsible for running this Sri Aurobindo and very successfully championed. Sri Madam was already introduced me, but the words she will say, I think I can deserve that. Anyway, basically as a teacher, she mentioned the position which I am regularly already, and we have witnessed families already in such a position. I am at present almost detached from academics, which is very painful. Anyway, solo man holding that position out to manage things. And that is one reason why I was hesitant when Sir told me, Professor told me that I was hesitant whether I should go because what kind of information I will be able to take for this. I was absolutely unsure, and even today I don't think that I have to do the preparation, meaningful preparation for this kind of call. Anyway, I jotted down something which is not very formal, rather an informal talk. I have some observations, maybe as a teacher by teaching the classroom, and some observations by some people who will Sri Aurobindo. So I present whatever I have jotted down. And I begin by putting a few words written by Anibhushan Chakraborty in his foreword to Shakespeare's Chaturtha Shatabdi Maya Brahmantha. It's a Bengali publication, basically, but contains English writings as well, published in 1964. Where he writes, I quote, "One or another of the ships which brought Clive and his fellow servants of the East India Company to the source of India in the middle of the 18th century also brought Shakespeare here. The empire which Clive helped to found on the soil of India has disappeared after a few years of prosperity and many more years of turmoil. The empire which Shakespeare founded on the mind and heart of Indian people shows no signs of decline, and indeed, with the passing of years, it is growing steadily in both extent and power. The founder of the Second Empire is still its unquestioned sovereign, untroubled by even a hint of disaffection against him. And despite political upheavals which have changed the face of India, his capital still remains in Calcutta. Very appropriately said, because he was writing it in 1964, and even today I think Calcutta, if it is not the capital, it is one of the very important capitals of Shakespeare studies. Sri Aurobindo regarded Shakespeare as a supreme poet, and quoting from volume 27, Sri Aurobindo regarded Shakespeare as the supreme poet. With the spiritual insight of a rishi, Sri Aurobindo observed about Shakespeare's plays that, I quote, "His is not a drama of mere externalized action, for it leads from within and more deeply than our external life." This is from 26, Future of Poetry. Sir, please correct me if I am wrong. His is not a drama of mere externalized action, for it lives from within and more deeply than our external life. This is not Virat, the seer and creator of gross forms, but Hiranyanagar, the luminous mind of dreams, looking through those forms to see his own images behind them. More than any other poet, Shakespeare has accomplished mentally the legendary feat of the impetuous sage Vishwamitra. His power of vision has created a Shakespearean world of his own, and it is, in spite of its realistic elements, a romantic world in a very true sense of the word, a world of the wonder and free power of life, and not of its mere external realities, where what is here dulled and hampered finds a greater, enlarged, and intense breath of living, an ultra-natural play of beauty, curiosity, and amplitude. Unquote. The voice we encounter in Shakespeare doesn't belong to any single person or a specific community at a certain point in their development. Nor does it represent just one era of humanity. Instead, it resonates as the timeless echo of humanity itself, where every individual's inner voice is intertwined. In this aspect, he stands as the quintessential global poet. His works also serve as a comprehensive profile of the entirety of human experience, rendered with unparalleled accuracy and artistry. While like any humanist, he presents his perspective on life through the characters he selects or invents, and the varying outcomes of their actions. He uncovers the universal essence of humanity in its countless dimensions, a feat unmatched by any other artist. His exploration of the human psyche and its multifaceted expressions of behavior is so exhaustive that anyone seeking to understand their own identity need to look no farther than his writings. This is in line with what Sri Aurobindo said. Referring to the tragic heroes of Shakespeare, Srikumar Bandyopadhyay, in one of his Bengali articles, wrote, I quote, "ম্যাকবেথের জীবনের প্রতি নিঃশেষ ঔদাসীন্য ও অনাস্থা, হ্যামলেটের অবস্থা সংকটে স্থির সিদ্ধান্ত গ্রহণের অক্ষমতা প্রসূত কূট দর্শন চিন্তা জান, লিয়ারের পারিবারিক স্নেহবন্ধনের উন্মূলনজাত সৃষ্টি বিধানের সামগ্রিক স্বীকৃতি, এ সবই কোন সাধারণ সত্য নয়, প্রত্যেকেরই ব্যক্তিগত অসহ্য মর্মবেদনার বৃন্তে বিকশিত রক্তকোষ। বাজ পাখি যেমন শিকারের উপর ঝাঁপাইয়া পড়ে, শেক্সপিয়ারও তেমনি ঊর্ধ্ব গগন হইতে জীবনের উপর ঝাঁপাইয়া পড়িয়া উহার অন্ত হইতে সত্য অভিজ্ঞতা নিষ্কাশন করিয়াছেন। দস্যু যেমন পথিকের উপর আপতিত হইয়া উহার সমস্ত ধনরত্ন আত্মসাৎ করে, শেক্সপিয়ারও তেমনি দুর্দম শক্তিতে জীবনের কুটি চাপিয়া ধরিয়া উহার গোপন ভাণ্ডারের রহস্য আদায় করিয়াছেন। জীবনের সঙ্গে এমন নগদ কারবারি শেক্সপিয়ারের মতো সাহিত্যিক সমাজে আর দ্বিতীয় মিলিবে না। যে অর্থে আলেকজান্ডার দিগ্বিজয়ী সম্রাট, সেই অর্থে শেক্সপিয়ার জীবন বিজয়ী স্রষ্টা। As I have told you, I'm not going to talk on Shakespeare's plays or sonnets. I will briefly say, taking cue from Sri Aurobindo, something about two aspects of Shakespeare's writings. One is obviously language, very briefly. In both the aspects, I will talk very briefly. And the other is, as far as the mother figure is concerned, in Shakespeare. I'd like to mention first Sri Aurobindo's words about the language used by the great poets. According to Sri Aurobindo, I quote, "It is this constant vitality, this magnificent vital surge in Shakespeare's language, which makes it a sovereign expression, not of life, and so far as it is also a voice of mind or knowledge, not of pure intellectual thought, but of life, mind, and of life knowledge. Unquote. It is this functional use of Shakespeare's language that critics and scholars often draw our attention to. And as a teacher in the classroom, I always try to find out this aspect, and in my own way, I try to explain this to my students. Now, you are in front of me. Many of you teach in colleges. Now, when I used to teach Macbeth, now I do not teach that text. The opening scene, we all know that the opening scene of Shakespeare's tragedies particularly, they actually hint at the keynote, and Macbeth is more so, very much. Now, when the first speech, with the words of the first speech, the first scene begins. Where shall we meet again? In thunder, lightning, and rain. Now, when it has not come to me just after 2-3 days, after the immediate readings, one day I thought that if we are staging Macbeth in Bangla, for example, in Mighty case, and if we are staging for audience absolutely Bengali, rural Bengal, then how to make it realistic? How can we make it realistic? Because riches are supernatural riches. And naturally, my attention was drawn to the words, the language, how Shakespeare's language is becoming functional, because my area of research was Hawkins, a poet who is famous for his use of words, and at times he's prioritized sound over sense. But then there is always a balance. The semantics and the phonetic aspects to join hands to create wonderful poetry. And in Shakespeare also I felt that. Now when the first words of the first speech, very briefly we know that. That shall be meet again. Notice the preponderance of the nasal sounds. And that nasal sound, if we give emphasis to those nasal sounds and try to pronounce it, the entire expression will be nasalized, which is very close to the voice of the supernatural creatures. It's not appreciated in the West. But if we are staging it in a place like Bankura, in rural India, particularly amidst such kind of an ambience where people know that supernatural creatures they speak in the nasalized voice, then I think this is a hint which we can take up and accordingly proceed. Again, when it ends, the first thing ends, where actually what we find, there is foul and all is fair. Yes, and earth or even filthy air, or filthy air. So now, again, what you find is the preponderance of the O, that is in phonetics, is not at is O, which is a fricative sound. And that may well hint at the number of battles, fights, because when you pronounce a O, there is audible friction. That friction may be a hint towards the inner friction. Friction in terms of conflict, friction in terms of passions, hardships, if we can take up like that, interpret it like that. So these are some of my observations as I teach Macbeth. I may not be very big, but then you may say that this is very simplistic. But then I think for students who are reading to hear for the first time, if we say such things, that may interest them to look farther. Right. So I feel that for a young reader, as I have said just, is reading the play for the first time, this could ignite in him or her an interest to delve deeper into Shakespeare's innovative use of language, which, as Sri Aurobindo says, is close to life and at the same time vital. Further, I would like to quote the words of Michael Mangan, who in his book, A Preface to Shakespeare's Tragedy Writes Observation about Language, Shakespeare himself was a great innovator in language, but his linguistic innovations were not confined to his ready acceptance of new words. His unconventional and resourceful use of everyday language, his puns and his wordplay had the effect of extending the meanings of individual words and of generating suggestions which go far beyond the paraphrasable meaning of his sentences. Unquote. Such works encourage readers like me to explore the innovations in Shakespeare's use of language. In this connection, let me mention one anecdote which is mentioned by Haridas Roy, a famous professor, in one of his writings on his teacher E.M. Wheeler. While paying his tribute to his excellent teaching, he refers to his innovative explanations of Shakespeare's text. He did not point to that particular area where actually he talks about his innovation, but then his observation is significant. What he says, he writes in Bengali. একদিন কোন ছাত্র বলিয়াছিল এই ব্যাখ্যা ইংরেজ ভেরিটি ডাইটেল প্রভৃতি টিকাকাররাও দেন না স্যার। মনে পড়ে তাহাতে তিনি উত্তর দিয়াছিলেন, তোমাদের কমেন্টেটররা কি অর্থ দিয়েছেন জানি না, তবে তোমরা আমাকে তাহাদের চেয়ে ছোট ভাবিতেছ কেন? আমিও একজন কমেন্টেটর, আমি বিরাতে জন্মিয়া মরিয়া যাই নাই, এবং আমার কথাগুলো ছাপার অক্ষরে নাই বলিয়া আমার অর্থটা তোমাদের যথাযথ মনে হইতেছে। আমরা ভাবিতাম পরীক্ষক তো সাহেবের লেকচার শুনিল না, তাহার যে পুঁজি ওই ভেরিটি ডাইটেল। So this is what Haridas Roy says. And then in a similar vein, Sri Purimal Goswami in his brief memoir, College Shakespeare Pathir Smriti, mentions about his teacher, Professor Kunjalal Nag. Again, I quote, অধ্যাপক কুঞ্জলাল নাগ শেক্সপিয়ারে ডুবে গিয়েছিলেন। অনেক স্থলেই তিনি তার নিজস্ব ব্যাখ্যা শোনাতেন এবং ভেরিটির ব্যাখ্যার প্রতিবাদ করতেন। বলতেন, ভেরিটি নয়, যেন ডেরিটি। ভেরিটি শেক্সপিয়ারের পারে ডেরি পড়িয়েছে। কেমব্রিজ ইউনিভার্সিটি প্রেসে ছাপা এডব্লিউ ভেরিটির নোট তখন আমরা পড়তাম, এখনো বোধহয় পাওয়া যায়। But then please don't take these mentions as justification of my way of looking at Shakespeare's language, right? Because they were great teachers. But I think that a teacher in a classroom can at times illuminate the students in his or her own unique way, definitely. Now, as far as the second aspect is concerned, Sri Aurobindo considered Shakespeare along with Homer as the greatest poet in respect of their essential poetic force and beauty. But at the same time, he pointed out the limitation of Shakespeare. He observed, I quote, the greatest minds have their limitations, and Shakespeare's overwhelming wit shut him out from two paradises, the mind of a child and the heart of a mother. Indeed, throughout the bigger and mostly unsympathetic list of mothers in Shakespeare's otherwise various and splendid gallery, there is not even one in whose speech there is the throbbing of a mother's heart. The sacred beauty of maternity is touched upon in a phrase or two. But from Shakespeare, we expect something more, some perfect and passionate enshrining of the most engrossing and selfless of human affections. And to this there is not even an approach. In this one respect, the Indian poet, perhaps from the superior depth and keenness of the domestic feelings peculiar to his nation, has outstripped his better English commentator. So this is Sri Aurobindo's observation. And Shakespeare's sonnets encompass a wide array of themes and characters, but there isn't a single mother figure as such prevalent throughout the collection. However, there are references to various women who would be interpreted as maternal figures or figures associated with motherhood in different ways. In some sonnets, Shakespeare addresses a dark lady who is often depicted in a complex and sometimes contradictory manner. While she isn't a traditional mother figure, some interpretations suggest that she embodies aspects of fertility, sensuality, and nurturing which are associated with motherhood. For example, in sonnet number 3, Shakespeare discusses the idea of procreation and passing on one's beauty to the next generation, which indirectly touches upon the maternal role in the perpetuation of life. Overall, while there isn't a central mother figure in Shakespeare's sonnets, themes related to motherhood, femininity, and the female presence are certainly present and can be interpreted in various ways throughout the collection. Side by side, Shakespeare's portrayal of mother figure in his plays are often negative and does not go beyond the physical aspects of a woman. I'm not going into any detail regarding this. We have already made it. So the infanticidal longings of Lady Macbeth and her desire to unsex herself is a case in point. When the Tempest, Prospero tells Miranda, remember the first time, thy mother was a piece of virtue, and she said, thou lost my daughter. Can we take this as a positive statement about us? Is it not by implication a pointer to the infidelity of mothers in general of that village? Think about this. I think already scholars and critics have thought about this and they have pointed it out. I would just like to mention the view of one critic. Mary Beth Rose in her article, where are the mothers in Shakespeare? Options for gender representation in the English Renaissance, which was published in Shakespeare Quarterly in 1991, points out that existing scholarship mainly focuses on three kinds of arguments for the absence of mother figure in Shakespeare. These three are theatrical, legal, and demographic. But she is of the opinion that each of these arguments has its own limitations. I'm just summarizing what she has said. First, to talk about theatrical fact, it is pointed out that the practical constraints of theatre production, such as the tradition of male actors portraying female roles due to societal restrictions, contribute to the scarcity of modern characters in Shakespeare's plays. While this notion is compelling, the constraints of theatrical practices offer only a partial rationale, prompting a reflection on the unique status of motherhood. If the necessity of cross-dressing hinders the portrayal of mothers on the English Renaissance stage, why does it not similarly impede the depiction of various other female roles depicting women of different ages and natures? Secondly, in the legal sphere, she says it is evident that married women in Renaissance England relinquished their autonomy and identity as they were unable to initiate legal proceedings and had limited control over their property and children. According to legal doctrine, during the Renaissance era, married women were legally absorbed into their husband's identity, essentially erasing their individual legal existence. However, recent scholarly research offers substantial empirical evidence to counter this view, demonstrating that women actively engaged in legal matters such as property transactions and marriage negotiations despite their marginalized legal status. And lastly, she points out, according to demographic data from Renaissance England, that highlights the harsh reality of parenthood, particularly for mothers who faced a significantly higher risk of death due to childbirth compared to their husbands. But contemporary scholarship challenges the notion of mothers being non-existent, revealing inconsistencies in demographic findings and emphasizing the importance of both mothers and fathers in 16th and 17th century English society. So, in the first part of her essay, she deals with this, and then she gives her own rationale how he looks at that issue of absence and presence of the mothers in Shakespeare. I'm not going into that. In Sioravindo's writings, the concept of the Divine Mother, if we look contrary to Shakespeare, what we find in Sioravindo's writings, the concept of the Divine Mother holds significant prominence. Sioravindo often referred to the Divine Mother as the dynamic aspect of the divine, embodying qualities of love, compassion, wisdom, and creative power. She is seen as the force that nurtures and guides creation towards its ultimate spiritual evolution. The Divine Mother is not merely a theological abstraction in Sioravindo's teaching, but a living and active presence that individuals can connect with on a personal level. She is considered the mediator between the individual soul and the divine consciousness, guiding the aspirant on the path of spiritual growth and transformation. In Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga, the Divine Mother plays a central role in the process of spiritual realization and transformation. Practitioners of integral yoga often invoke her presence, seek her guidance, and surrender to her divine will as they progress on their spiritual journey. Overall, the Divine Mother figure in Sri Aurobindo's writings represents the nurturing and transformative aspect of the divine, guiding individuals towards spiritual realization and fulfillment. Sri Aurobindo regarded Shakespeare as a magician and praises him for his marvelous poetic rendering of life and the spell that his poetry casts upon us. He says, the whole age which he embodies is magnified by his presence, and the adjacent figures catch something of the light and principle of his glory and appear in it more splendid than they are. So these are Aurobindo's own words. In interpreting Shakespeare today from different perspectives and from various theoretical angles, are we risking, this is my question, are we risking the enjoyment of the magic spell of Shakespeare's writings? I would like to quote again Sukumar Bandyopadhyay's observation, which he made in 1964, in that same essay from where I quoted already. He wrote, Shakespeare's জন্মকাল হইতে 400 বৎসর অতিক্রান্ত হয়ে গেছে, 1964 এই সুদীর্ঘ শতাব্দী চতুষ্টয়ের মধ্যে আমাদের জীবন জীবন সম্বন্ধীয় জ্ঞান নানাভাবে সমৃদ্ধ হইয়াছে তাহা নিশ্চিত। কিন্তু আসল প্রশ্ন হইল, এই দীর্ঘকালে আমরা কি শেক্সপিয়ারের অভিমুখে বিশেষ অগ্রসর হয়ে আছি, না উহার বিপরীত পথে চলে আছি? দুঃখের সহিত বলিতে হয় যে এই অন্তর্বর্তীকালে আমাদের জীবন ও জীবনকে দেখিবার ভঙ্গি শেক্সপিয়ার বিমুখতার দিকেই প্রবলভাবে ঝুঁকিয়াছে। আমরা আমাদের অভ্যস্ত ব্যাখ্যা বিশ্লেষণ ও সমালোচনা পদ্ধতির সাহায্যেই তাহার প্রতি আমাদের শ্রদ্ধার বোধ নির্মাণ করিতেছি। আমাদের জীবন এখন বহু জটিল মতবাদের জালে জড়িত, নানা দুশ্চেদ্য সমস্যা জর্জর। রবীন্দ্রনাথের রক্তকরবী রাজার ন্যায় আমরা জীবনকে প্রত্যক্ষভাবে নয়, লৌহজালের অন্তরাল হইতেই দেখি। জীবনের সহিত আমাদের অভ্যন্তরীণ সংযোগ আজ বিচ্ছিন্নতা। আজ কাব্য নাটকে অর্থনীতি, সমাজনীতি, রাজনীতি ও বৈজ্ঞানিক ফলশ্রুতির অন্তর্ভুক্তি প্রয়াসেরই একাধিপত্য। প্রায় সব সাহিত্যিকই এক একটি থিওরি বা উদ্দেশ্যের ঠুলি চোখে পড়িয়াই জীবন দৃশ্যের উদাহরণ করিতেছেন। কি লেখক, কি পাঠক, সকলের জীবনী যান্ত্রিকতা কবলিত। কবির প্রজ্ঞাময় তৃতীয় নেত্র, yes, Sri Aurobindo is very relevant. কবির প্রজ্ঞাময় তৃতীয় নেত্র, ঋষির অধ্যাত্ম দৃষ্টি, জীবন রসিকের স্বচ্ছন্দ সম্ভব আজ আর সাহিত্য সৃষ্টিতে আত্মপ্রকাশের বিশেষ অবসর পায় না। যখন শেক্সপিয়ারের নাটক অভিনয় করি, তখনও উহা যেন আমাদের জীবন ছন্দের সহিত অসংশ্লিষ্ট ব্যতিক্রম ধর্মী বলিয়া মনে হয়। Now, as we are now today in Shantiniketan, Tagore's place, I would like to conclude by Tagore's tribute to Shakespeare. As far as Sukumar Bandyopadhyay's observation is concerned, we can debate this observation. But this was the feeling of a great teacher and scholar of Bengal about his contemporary Shakespeare scholarship. And as I conclude, I would like to quote a few lines from Tagore's poem on Shakespeare. এবং আমরা জানি রবীন্দ্রনাথ শেক্সপিয়ার প্রশস্তি কবিতাটি লিখেছিলেন 1916 খ্রিস্টাব্দে শেক্সপিয়ার 300 মৃত্যুবার্ষিকী উৎসবে প্রকাশিত বুক অফ হোমেজ টু শেক্সপিয়ার গ্রন্থে। আমি পুরোটা করছি না। যেদিন উদিলে তুমি বিশ্বকবি দূর সিন্ধু পারে, ইংল্যান্ডের দ্বীপপ্রান্ত পেয়েছিল সেদিন তোমার। তারপরে ধীরে ধীরে অনন্তের নিঃশব্দ ইঙ্গিতে দিগন্তের কোণ ছাড়ি শতাব্দী প্রহরে প্রহরে উঠিয়া সতীর্থ জ্যোতি মধ্যাহ্নের গগনের পরে নিয়েছ আসন তব সকল দিকের কেন্দ্র দেশে বিশ্বচিত্ত উদ্ভাসিয়া। তাই হেরো যুগান্তের শেষে ভারত সমুদ্র তীরে কঙ্কমান শাখা পুঞ্জি আজি নারিকেল কুঞ্জবনে জয় উঠিতেছিল। Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kubal. And we're very happy that you have come here. And I was amazed by your interest in Shakespeare. I know that you are in, Theodore. I know you are in Theodore. And it's good that at least one faculty is taking interest in Theodore so seriously. And the speech and many perceptive issues like the portraits to major phrases from Shakespeare, the art and drama, the Lumiere Savior here, which never Shakespeare's works. So at then we spoke of all the Bengali scholars who spoke on Shakespeare, and indeed Theodore's words with all the scholars. So this is very illuminating for all of us, and it is really our good that we came here, leading your duty as the Vice Chancellor.